The journey north was a quiet one, not the triumphant return of a conquering hero, but the somber retreat of a man who had seen the world change. Erik Bjornsson, who had once been a young farmer with a fire in his eyes, was now a seasoned warrior with the weight of a lost war on his shoulders. The waves of the North Sea, which had once seemed like a pathway to glory, now felt like a cold, indifferent expanse. He had left England with a handful of his most loyal men, the remnants of a shield wall that had been shattered at Eddington. They were not defeated in the way that a man is defeated when he is killed or captured. They were defeated in a much deeper sense. They had been part of something that had ended. As the long ship cut through the gray water, Erik had time to think. He thought about the young man he had been, the one who had joined the great heathen army with dreams of glory and vengeance. He thought about the battles he had fought, the victories he had won, the men he had led. He thought about the shield wall, that perfect expression of Viking discipline and courage. He had believed in the shield wall. He had believed in the strength of his people. He had believed that they were unstoppable, and he had been wrong. Alfred, the Saxon king, had shown him that. Alfred had shown him that there was a different kind of power in the world, a power that was not based on brute force or individual courage, but on strategy, on patience, on a deep understanding of the land and its people. Alfred had hidden in the marshes, had gathered his forces, had waited for the right moment to strike. And when he had struck with a force that had shattered the great heathen army and changed the course of history. Erik had been there. He had seen it happen. He had tried to stop it. And he had failed. Now, as he sailed north, back to the land of his birth, he was a different man. The fire in his eyes had not been extinguished, but it had been tempered by a new kind of wisdom. He was no longer a young man with something to prove. He was a leader who had been tested in the crucible of war and had emerged with a new understanding of the world. He had learned that victory is not always about winning battles. Sometimes it is about surviving, about adapting, about learning from your mistakes. And Erik had learned a great deal. He arrived in his homeland not as a conquering hero, but as a man with a mission. He did not come back to retire to his farm to live out his days in peace. He came back for a reason. He came back to build something new, something stronger, something that could not be defeated. He came back to raise an army. But this would not be just any army. This would be an army that was different from the great heathen army. This would be an army that was not just a collection of warriors, but a disciplined, organized force. This would be an army that was led not by a group of feuding chieftains, but by a single commander with a clear vision. This would be Erik's army. The process was slow at first. Scandinavia was not the same place he had left. The news of the defeat at Eddington had spread, and many were wary of joining another expedition to England. They had heard stories of Alfred's cunning, of the fortified towns, of the Saxon armies that were now better prepared to face a Viking threat. The old allure of easy plunder was gone. Erik knew he could not appeal to their greed alone. He had to offer them something more, something that resonated with the deeper currents of their culture, a chance for a legacy. A place in a saga that would be told for generations. He traveled from settlement to settlement, not as a brash warlord demanding tribute, but as a respected veteran sharing his wisdom. He did not boast of his victories. Instead, he spoke of his failures. He told them about Eddington, about the discipline of Alfred's army, about the strategic thinking that had outmaneuvered the great heathen army. His honesty was disarming. Warriors who had grown up on tales of Viking invincibility listened with a new kind of attention. This was not a chieftain promising easy riches. This was a leader who understood the new realities of warfare. Erik's message was simple, but profound. The age of raiding was over. The future belonged to those who could build, who could hold territory, who could create something that would last. He spoke of a new kind of Viking army, one that would be as skilled in settlement and governance as it was in battle. He painted a picture of a new Viking kingdom in England, a place where their people could build a future, not just a fortune. He was not just recruiting warriors. He was recruiting founders. He was looking for men who were willing to fight not just for gold, but for a home. He sought out the veterans, the men who, like him, had seen the world change. He found them in quiet fjords and bustling market towns, men who had fought in England, in Francia, in the lands of the Rus. They were older now, their beards streaked with gray, but their eyes still held the fire of the warrior. They understood what Erik was talking about. They had seen the limitations of the old ways. They had seen how easily a raiding party could be defeated, how quickly a fortune could be lost. They were ready for something more. One by one they came to him. A grizzled shipbuilder who had lost his sons in the Irish Sea. A blacksmith whose hands could forge a sword that would never break. A skald whose songs could stir the hearts of men. They were not the young, reckless warriors who had followed Ivar and Halfdan. They were the seasoned, thoughtful men who would form the backbone of Erik's new army. They were the men who understood that a kingdom is not built on a single victory, but on a foundation of loyalty, discipline, and a shared vision for the future. Erik also did something that was almost unheard of in Viking society. He trained his men, not just in the use of the axe and the shield, but in the art of war. He taught them the tactics he had learned from Alfred. He taught them how to build fortifications, how to scout enemy territory, how to fight as a coordinated force. He drilled them relentlessly, day after day, until they moved as one. He forged them into a weapon that was sharper, stronger, and more disciplined than any Viking army that had ever come before. His first true ally was a man named Kalin, the shipbuilder. Kalin was a man whose face was a roadmap of sorrows, his hands gnarled from a lifetime of shaping wood, his heart heavy with the loss of 2 sons to the treacherous Irish Sea. When Erik spoke of building ships that were not just fast but resilient, ships that could withstand the brutal northern storms and deliver an army safely to a distant shore, Kalin listened. He saw in Erik not a reckless youth chasing glory, but a thoughtful commander who understood that the foundation of any successful campaign was logistics. Kalin pledged his loyalty and his craft to Erik, not for a share of the plunder, but for the chance to build something that would last. Then came Gunnar, the blacksmith. Gunnar was a mountain of a man, his arms thick as tree trunks, his beard singed from the heat of the forge. He was a master of his craft, a man who could read the soul of metal and shape it into a weapon of perfect balance and deadly beauty. Gunnar had grown weary of forging swords for petty chieftains who used them to settle drunken squabbles. He saw in Erik a leader who understood the true purpose of a weapon, not as a tool for personal gain, but as an instrument for building a kingdom. When Erik spoke of an army where every warrior would have a sword of the highest quality, a shield that would not splinter, and a helmet that would not crack, Gunnar saw a vision that resonated with his own sense of purpose. And then there was Finn, the skald. Finn was a young man with eyes that seemed to see into the very soul of the world. His voice was not loud, but it carried a power that could move the hearts of men. He had grown up on the old sagas, the tales of heroes and gods, of battles and voyages. But he had also seen the darkness that lay beneath the surface of those stories, the greed, the betrayal, the senseless violence. When Erik spoke of a new saga, a saga that would be about more than just plunder and conquest, a saga that would be about building a new world, Finn knew that he had found his true subject. He became Erik's voice, his words carrying the leader's vision to every corner of Scandinavia. But it was not easy. For every man who answered Erik's call, there were 10 who scoffed. The chieftains of the old guard saw him as a threat. They had grown rich and powerful from the old ways, from the endless cycle of raiding and warfare. They did not want a new king, a new power that would challenge their authority. They spread rumors about Erik, calling him a coward who had fled from England, a madman who was leading his followers to their doom. But Erik was no longer the naive young warrior who had followed the sons of Ragnar. He was a strategist, a leader who had learned from the best. He anticipated their moves, he countered their schemes, he turned their own tactics against them. He established his main settlement in a deep, defensible fjord, a place that could only be reached by sea. He called it Vindheim, the home of the wind. There, he built not just a military camp, but a community. He established laws, he set up a system of justice, he encouraged trade and craftsmanship. He showed the people that a leader could be strong without being a tyrant, that a community could be prosperous without being predatory. Vindheim became a beacon, a symbol of the new Viking way. It was a place where a man was judged not by his birth, but by his skill, his courage, his loyalty. Years passed. The boys who had listened to Finn's first songs grew into men, their hands calloused from the training drills Erik had devised. The ships that Kalin had laid the keels for now filled the fjord, their dragon prows straining at their moorings, eager for the open sea. The armory that Gunnar had built overflowed with swords and shields and helmets, enough to arm an army that could challenge a kingdom. The whispers of the chieftains had faded, replaced by the roar of 1,000 voices chanting Erik's name. The time had come. One evening, as the sun set over the fjord, casting long shadows across the water, Erik stood on a high cliff overlooking Vindheim. Below him the settlement was a hive of activity, the sounds of hammers and anvils and human voices blending into a symphony of purpose. He could see the longships, their masts like a forest of spears, their sails furled, waiting for the wind that would carry them south. He could see the warriors, their shields polished, their axes sharp, their faces set with a quiet determination. He had done it. He had gone back north. He had come for an army. And now, that army was ready. He turned to Finn, who stood beside him, his harp in his hands. "Sing me a song of the journey to come," Erik said, his voice quiet but firm. "Sing of the sea and the stars and the land that awaits us. Sing of the new world we will build." Finn nodded, his fingers finding the strings of his harp. And as the first notes of the song drifted out over the fjord, a new saga began. The saga of Erik Bjornsson, the king who had returned from the north. The saga of the army that would change the world. Among the veterans who answered Erik's call was a man named Ragnar the Scarred, a warrior who had lost an eye in a battle in Ireland but had gained a reputation for tactical brilliance. Ragnar had fought under Ivar the Boneless, had been part of the great heathen army, had seen the rise and fall of Viking power in England. When Erik spoke to him, Ragnar listened with the intensity of a man who had been waiting for this moment his entire life. He became one of Erik's most trusted advisors, a man who understood the complexities of warfare in a changing world. There was also Soren, a master of siege warfare, a man who had studied the fortifications of every major city in Europe. Soren had learned his craft from the best engineers in Francia, had spent years perfecting the art of breaking through walls and overcoming defensive positions. When Erik explained his vision of a new kind of Viking army, one that could not just raid but could conquer and hold territory, Soren saw an opportunity to apply his knowledge on a grand scale. He became Erik's chief engineer, responsible for the design and construction of fortifications, the planning of siege operations, the development of new weapons and tactics. And there was Astrid, a woman who had grown up in a Viking settlement and had learned the ways of war alongside her brothers. She was skilled with a bow, deadly with a spear, and possessed of a strategic mind that rivaled that of any man. When Erik established his settlement at Vindheim, Astrid became the commander of his scouts, leading the reconnaissance missions that would provide the intelligence Erik needed to plan his campaigns. She was a symbol of the new Viking way, a woman who had found her place not in the home, but in the world of strategy and warfare. These were the men and women who would form the core of Erik's new kingdom. They were not just warriors, but visionaries. Men and women who understood that the future belonged to those who could adapt, who could learn, who could build. They were the foundation upon which Erik would construct his empire, the loyal companions who would stand by his side through the trials and triumphs that lay ahead. As the fleet prepared to depart from Vindheim, Erik gathered his commanders for a final council. He stood before them, his face weathered by years of struggle, his eyes burning with a fierce determination. "We are not going to England as raiders," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "We are going as conquerors. We are going to build a kingdom that will last for generations. We are going to show the world that Vikings are not just warriors, but leaders, administrators, builders. We are going to change the course of history." His commanders listened in silence, understanding the magnitude of what he was proposing. They knew that what lay ahead would be difficult, that there would be setbacks and challenges, that the road to victory would be long and hard. But they also knew that they were following a leader who had the vision and the determination to succeed. They knew that they were part of something greater than themselves, part of a saga that would be told for generations to come. And so, as the sun rose over Vindheim on that fateful morning, the fleet prepared to depart. The ships were loaded with supplies, the warriors took their places, the skalds prepared their songs. Erik stood at the bow of the sea serpent, looking out at the vast expanse of the North Sea, and felt a profound sense of purpose. He had gone back north, he had come for an army, and now that army was ready to change the world. The vision that Erik had cultivated over the years was not just about military conquest. It was about creating a new kind of society, a society where Vikings and Saxons could live together, where commerce could flourish, where a new culture could be born. This vision had inspired thousands of men to follow him, to leave their homes in Scandinavia and come to England to build something new. They were not just warriors, they were pioneers, settlers, builders of a new world. The preparation for the invasion had taken years. Erik had spent countless hours planning, strategizing, gathering intelligence. He had sent scouts to England to map the terrain, to understand the political situation, to identify the weaknesses in Saxon defenses. He had trained his men relentlessly, drilling them in the shield wall, teaching them the importance of discipline and coordination. He had gathered supplies, built ships, organized the logistics of moving thousands of men across the sea. Every detail had been carefully planned, every contingency had been considered. And now, as the fleet sailed across the northern sea, Erik felt a sense of calm certainty. This was his moment. This was what he had been preparing for his entire life. The years of struggle, the defeats, the setbacks, all of it had led to this moment. He was no longer a young warrior, eager for glory and plunder. He was a leader, a king, a man with a vision for the future, and he was about to change the course of history.